What if the man cleaning the bank floor secretly owned the entire building? Marcus Whitmore was one of the richest black businessmen in Atlanta. But on the morning his brand new bank opened, he walked in wearing a janitor's uniform and carrying a mop instead of a briefcase. Nobody knew who he really was. Nobody knew he was quietly watching how people treated those they thought had no value. Then he met a woman everyone else looked down on. And what happened next changed his life forever. Marcus Whitmore stood alone beside the giant windows of his penthouse, overlooking downtown Atlanta. Below him, the city glowed with money, power, and movement. Luxury cars slid through the streets. Tall buildings reflected gold lights into the night sky. Everything looked beautiful, perfect even. But Marcus felt nothing. The engagement ring box sitting on the coffee table behind him had been closed for hours. Earlier that night, he had ended his engagement to Vanessa Cole. Not because she cheated. Not because they had some dramatic fight. Marcus simply realized something painful. Vanessa loved the life around him more than she loved him. She loved private jets, charity galas, expensive vacations. She loved being seen beside a billionaire. But Marcus no longer believed she would stay if the money disappeared. "You okay?" Daniel Price asked quietly from the kitchen. Marcus let out a tired laugh. "I think I'm tired of people pretending." Daniel walked closer. He had been Marcus's lawyer and best friend for years. "That bad?" Marcus nodded slowly. "After we argued about the prenup, she asked if the beach house would still be in my name." Daniel sighed. "I'm sorry, man." Marcus didn't answer. His eyes drifted toward an old framed photograph near the bookshelf. It was a picture of his mother, Angela Whitmore. She had raised him alone in Detroit while working as a janitor in office buildings at night. Marcus still remembered sitting in empty hallways as a child while she cleaned floors after midnight. Some people ignored her completely. Others treated her like she didn't matter. One memory stayed with him forever. Marcus was 12 when a woman spilled coffee on herself after bumping into his mother. The woman looked disgusted and snapped. "People like you should stay out of the way." Marcus never forgot the silence on his mother's face afterward. That moment shaped his life. Years later, Marcus became one of the most successful black businessmen in Atlanta. Real estate, investments, restaurants, and now, Whitmore Community Bank. His biggest project yet, a bank designed for ordinary people. Working families, small business owners, single parents trying to survive. Marcus wanted people to feel respected there, no matter how much money they had. But lately, one fear kept bothering him. What if the people inside his bank slowly became the same kind of people who once looked down on his mother? Marcus looked back at Daniel. "The bank opens Monday." Daniel nodded. "Big week." Marcus shook his head. "I need to know what kind of people work there when nobody important is watching." Daniel frowned slightly. "What are you talking about?" Marcus took a slow breath. "I'm going undercover." Daniel blinked. "As what?" Marcus smiled faintly. "A janitor." Silence filled the room. Then Daniel laughed in disbelief. "You're serious?" "Completely." Marcus looked down at his hands. "Managers only see polished behavior. Janitors see the truth." Daniel studied him carefully. "And what exactly are you hoping to find?" Marcus stared at the city lights again. Maybe proof that kindness still exists when money leaves the room. 2 days later, Marcus removed the expensive suits from his closet and replaced them with gray work clothes, heavy boots, and a plastic name tag that read, Malik Reed. He stared at himself in the mirror, wearing the uniform for the first time. No billionaire image, no power, no status, just another working man people would probably ignore. And somehow, that frightened him more than losing money ever could. But Marcus still had no idea that the first person who would truly touch his heart during this strange experiment was already on her way to Whitmore Community Bank, carrying a wrinkled resume and trying desperately not to lose hope. Monday morning arrived with bright lights, fresh flowers, and television cameras outside Whitmore Community Bank. The building stood in the middle of downtown Atlanta like a symbol of success. Tall glass walls, clean marble floors, expensive furniture. Everything looked polished and important. Employees adjusted their ties and fixed their makeup while waiting for wealthy clients to arrive. Everyone wanted the first day to look perfect. What nobody realized was that the owner of the entire bank was already inside the building, pushing a mop bucket across the floor. Marcus Whitmore entered through the employee hallway, wearing gray janitor clothes, heavy work boots, and a plastic name tag that read, Malik Reed. No luxury watch, no custom suit, no security team following behind him. Just another worker most people would never notice. A young security guard glanced at him quickly near the back entrance. Maintenance staff uses the service elevator, the guard said, without even looking at Marcus's face. Marcus nodded calmly. Thank you. The guard immediately smiled at a wealthy customer walking through the front doors seconds later. Good morning, sir. Welcome to Whitmore Community Bank. Marcus noticed the difference instantly. Same building, same people, different treatment. He quietly stepped into the basement supply room, where an older man sat drinking coffee beside shelves full of cleaning products. You the new guy? The man asked. Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. The man stood slowly and extended his hand. Henry Lawson. Marcus shook it firmly. Malik Reed. Henry studied him for a second. You ever done janitor work before? Marcus smiled faintly. My mother cleaned office buildings most of her life. Henry nodded with quiet understanding. Then you already know how invisible this job can feel. Marcus looked at him carefully, but said nothing. Upstairs, the lobby slowly filled with customers. Marcus began wiping fingerprints from the front windows while observing everything around him. Employees greeted wealthy clients with bright smiles and warm voices. Can I offer you coffee? Right this way, ma'am. We're honored to have you with us, but when cleaning staff walked past, conversations changed. Some employees moved aside without speaking. Others acted like janitors were simply part of the furniture. Around 10 o'clock, a sharp female voice echoed across the lobby. Why is this floor still wet? Marcus turned around and saw Evelyn Carter for the first time. Tall, blonde hair tied perfectly behind her head, navy designer suit, cold eyes. She walked toward Marcus with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed immediately. Customers are arriving, she said. I don't want anyone slipping because warning signs weren't placed properly. Marcus nodded politely. Understood. Evelyn glanced briefly at his name tag. Malik, right? Yes, ma'am. Then move faster. She walked away without another word. No yelling, no insults, but her tone carried something colder than anger. Dismissal. Henry quietly stepped beside Marcus moments later. That woman could freeze fire, he muttered. Marcus almost smiled. She always like that? Henry shrugged. Depends how much money you got. The comment stayed in Marcus's mind the rest of the morning. By lunchtime, employees gathered inside the staff break room. Marcus entered quietly carrying a sandwich and bottle of water. He immediately noticed the unspoken division inside the room. Bank managers and office workers sat near the windows laughing together. Cleaning staff sat near the vending machines beside the hallway. Nobody explained the seating arrangement. Nobody needed to. Marcus sat beside Henry, while several younger employees whispered nearby. One teller glanced at Marcus's uniform and smirked, I swear they hire anybody now, she whispered softly to her friend. They laughed under their breath. Marcus pretended not to hear. But inside, disappointment slowly grew heavier. He built this bank hoping it would feel different from the places his mother once cleaned. Instead, the same invisible walls already existed here too. Later that afternoon, Marcus accidentally brushed against a junior manager carrying iced coffee near the elevators. A few drops splashed onto the floor. The manager sighed dramatically. Seriously? Marcus immediately grabbed paper towels. Sorry about that. The manager rolled his eyes. Well, cleaning messes is your department anyway. A few nearby employees laughed quietly. Marcus forced a calm smile while wiping the floor. But deep inside, something hurt. Not because of the joke itself, because the man said it so casually, like disrespect had become normal. Like some people simply deserved less dignity than others. Around 3 o'clock, Marcus stood near the lobby windows cleaning glass, while watching employees interact with customers. Rich clients received patience, attention, respect. Meanwhile, an elderly man wearing work clothes struggled with paperwork at the front desk, while employees grew visibly irritated with him. Marcus felt uneasy watching it happen. This was exactly what he feared. A beautiful building filled with people slowly forgetting how to treat ordinary human beings. Henry walked over carrying extra trash bags. You all right, kid? Marcus nodded slowly. Just thinking. Henry gave a tired smile. Dangerous habit in a place like this. Marcus looked around the busy lobby again. Expensive suits, forced smiles, quiet judgment hiding behind professionalism. Then Henry spoke again. People show you who they really are when they think you got no power. Marcus stayed silent because he knew the older man was right. And before the day ended, Marcus was about to meet someone who would prove that kindness still existed in places where nobody bothered looking. Because later that same afternoon, the front doors suddenly opened and a woman rushed inside, carrying a wrinkled resume in trembling hands. The lobby doors burst open at exactly 3:12 that afternoon. A woman hurried inside, holding a wrinkled folder tightly against her chest. Her breathing was uneven, not dramatic, just exhausted, like life had been pulling at her from every direction all day long. Marcus looked up from the glass window he was cleaning. The woman paused near the entrance and quickly fixed her coat before walking toward the front desk. She looked around 34, brown skin, tired eyes, dark curly hair pulled into a loose bun that was already falling apart. Her clothes were neat but old, the kind of outfit someone wears when they only own one good interview outfit and pray nobody notices. Hi, she said politely to the receptionist. I'm Naomi Brooks. I'm here for the accounting interview with Ms. Carter. The receptionist checked the computer. Then her expression changed slightly. Your interview was at 3 o'clock. Naomi swallowed hard. I know, I'm so sorry. My son had an asthma attack this morning, and the bus, Ms. Carter already filled the position. The words landed quietly, but Marcus saw the pain immediately. Naomi didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She simply lowered her eyes for 1 second and took a slow breath, like someone trying very hard not to completely fall apart in public. I understand, she said softly. The receptionist looked uncomfortable now. I'm sorry. Naomi nodded politely and stepped away from the desk. Marcus watched her walk toward the sitting area near the front windows. She sat down slowly and pressed her hands together tightly. Not crying, just breathing, holding herself together one careful breath at a time. Something about that silence caught Marcus's attention more than tears would have. Henry noticed it too. The older janitor leaned closer to Marcus. That woman's carrying something heavy, he murmured. Marcus nodded quietly. Across the lobby, Naomi opened the wrinkled folder in her lap. Inside were copies of her resume, accounting certificates, recommendation letters, and handwritten interview notes. Marcus noticed one paper clipped near the top. A child's drawing. A small house with the words, "Mom, you got this," written in blue crayon. Naomi stared at the drawing for a few seconds before carefully placing it back inside the folder. Then she stood up again. Marcus expected her to leave. Instead, she walked directly toward Evelyn Carter's office. Evelyn looked mildly annoyed when Naomi entered. "Can I help you?" Naomi stood straight, despite the embarrassment still visible in her eyes. "I know I missed my interview, and I understand the accounting position is gone." Evelyn crossed her arms. "That's correct." Naomi nodded once. "But if there are any other openings here, anything at all, I'd still like to apply." Evelyn looked surprised for a moment. "Anything?" Naomi gave a small, tired smile. "I have a son at home, so yes, anything." Evelyn glanced down at Naomi's resume. "You studied accounting?" "Yes, ma'am." "You really want to clean floors instead?" Naomi's voice stayed calm. "I want to work." The room became quiet. Even Marcus stopped moving his mop while listening from across the lobby. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "We do have an opening for evening cleaning staff." Naomi nodded immediately. "I'll take it." "You understand the pay is much lower than the accounting position?" "I understand." Evelyn studied her carefully. "Most people with your qualifications wouldn't accept that." Naomi's answer came without hesitation. "Most people don't have a 9-year-old waiting at home depending on them." That sentence stayed in Marcus's mind. Not because it sounded dramatic, because it sounded real. Naomi wasn't begging for sympathy. She wasn't pretending to be strong either. She was simply facing reality without lying about it. Evelyn handed her a short application form. "Human Resources closes in 20 minutes." Naomi sat near the lobby table and started filling out paperwork immediately. Marcus quietly walked past with his cleaning cart. He noticed her hands trembling slightly while she wrote. Not from fear, from exhaustion. "You okay?" Marcus asked gently. Naomi looked up, surprised someone had spoken to her at all. "Yeah," she answered quickly. Then she smiled politely. "Long day." Marcus nodded toward the paperwork. "You really gonna take the janitor job?" Naomi laughed softly under her breath. "Right now, I'd probably take a job wrestling alligators." That caught Marcus off guard. He smiled before he could stop himself. Naomi noticed. "Sorry," she said. "That sounded crazy." "No," Marcus replied quietly. "It sounded honest." For a second, the tension in Naomi's face softened. "My son's asthma medication went up again last month," she admitted. "Rent, too." She looked down at the paperwork. "Life doesn't really give you time to be proud sometimes." Marcus stayed silent because he understood exactly what she meant. He remembered his own mother saying almost the same thing years ago. Naomi finished the forms and stood up again. "Anyway," she said softly, "I should probably stop talking before I embarrass myself more today." Marcus shook his head. "You're doing fine." Naomi smiled politely before walking toward Human Resources. Marcus watched her disappear down the hallway. Something about her stayed with him immediately. Maybe it was her calmness. Maybe it was the way she protected her dignity, even while struggling. Or maybe it was because, for the first time since entering that building as Malik Reed, Marcus had finally met someone who felt completely real. But Naomi Brooks had no idea that accepting this job would soon place her inside one of the hardest seasons of her life. Naomi Brooks officially started working at Whitmore Community Bank the following Monday evening. The gray cleaning uniform they gave her was slightly too large, and the sleeves kept folding over her hands while she worked. Still, she wore it neatly. quietly, like someone trying to protect the last pieces of dignity life had not stolen yet. Marcus watched her from across the lobby while pretending to organize cleaning supplies beside Henry Lawson. Naomi moved carefully through the building, learning routines, memorizing supply closets, asking polite questions whenever she felt unsure. She never complained, even when some employees clearly looked down on her. "That's the new cleaning lady?" one teller whispered near the customer service desk. "I thought she interviewed for accounting." Another employee laughed softly. Guess life humbled her real fast. Naomi heard it. Marcus could tell by the small tension in her shoulders. But she kept walking without reacting. That impressed him more than anger would have. Most people fought humiliation loudly. Naomi survived it quietly. Around 7 that evening, Evelyn Carter stepped out of her office carrying a tablet. "Naomi!" she called sharply. Naomi immediately stopped mopping near the hallway. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn glanced toward the large conference room upstairs. "One of the executive clients spilled coffee during a meeting. I need the carpet cleaned before tomorrow morning." Naomi nodded. "Of course." Evelyn paused for a second. "And make sure the smell is gone too. These rooms are expensive." The comment sounded unnecessary, deliberate even. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly. "I understand." After Evelyn walked away, Henry muttered under his breath, "That woman treats empathy like it costs money." Naomi heard him and smiled faintly. "It's all right." But Marcus could see it wasn't. An hour later, Naomi struggled carrying a heavy cleaning machine toward the conference room upstairs. Without saying anything, Marcus quietly stepped forward and grabbed the other side. Naomi looked surprised. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Marcus replied calmly. "Still helping." For the first time that night, Naomi laughed softly. It wasn't loud, just tired and genuine. "You always this quiet?" she asked, while they carried the machine together. Marcus smirked slightly. "Only around people who scare me." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "And who scares you?" Marcus glanced toward Evelyn's office. "Management." Naomi laughed again, this time a little longer. Something about hearing her laugh made the cold atmosphere inside the bank feel softer for a moment. Later that evening, they sat near the employee break room sharing vending machine coffee during a short break. Naomi rubbed her forehead tiredly. "You got kids?" Marcus asked carefully. Naomi smiled immediately at the question. The exhaustion on her face softened in seconds. "One son, Caleb." "How old?" 9. Marcus nodded. "That the boy who drew the picture in your folder?" Naomi looked surprised. "You saw that?" Marcus smiled awkwardly. "Accidentally." Naomi pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. A skinny little boy with glasses smiled widely while holding a school basketball. "That's Caleb." Marcus studied the photo quietly. "He looks happy." Naomi's smile faded slightly around the edges. "I try." That answer stayed with him. Not, "He is." Just, "I try." Marcus understood what that meant. Parents carrying too much pressure often stopped measuring success by happiness. Survival became enough. Naomi took a slow sip of coffee. "His asthma got worse this year." Marcus listened quietly. "Some months the medication costs more than groceries." She laughed softly after saying it, but there was no humor in the sound. "My mom used to help before she passed away." Marcus looked at her carefully. "When?" Naomi stared down at the coffee cup in her hands. 2 years ago." Silence settled gently between them. "Cancer," she added quietly. Marcus suddenly remembered sitting beside hospital beds himself years ago while watching his own mother grow weaker after decades of exhausting work. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Naomi nodded once. She used to tell me something all the time. Marcus waited. Naomi smiled faintly. Don't let hard days turn you into a hard person. Marcus looked away for a second after hearing that, because his mother used to say something similar. Funny how pain sometimes taught good people the exact same lessons. Upstairs, several employees walked past the break room laughing loudly without acknowledging either of them. Naomi noticed it too. Crazy, isn't it? She said quietly. Marcus glanced back at her. What? Naomi shrugged slightly. People in expensive suits can make you feel invisible real fast. Marcus stayed silent because she had unknowingly described the exact reason he started this entire experiment. A few minutes later, Naomi returned to cleaning the second-floor offices. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus found her struggling to reach fingerprints near the top glass panels outside the executive offices. Without a word, he handed her a longer extension tool from the storage closet. Naomi blinked in surprise. You keep saving me tonight. Marcus shrugged casually. Maybe I'm trying to earn free coffee tomorrow. Naomi smiled again. Softer this time. More comfortable around him now. Careful, she teased quietly. That almost sounded like flirting. Marcus laughed under his breath before quickly looking away. Strange. He had spent years around polished women in designer dresses who knew exactly how to impress powerful men. But somehow this exhausted single mother in an oversized janitor uniform felt more genuine than any of them, and that realization unsettled him more than he expected. By the end of the shift, Naomi looked physically drained. Still, before leaving, she carefully pushed every chair back into place inside the conference room and straightened the magazines in the waiting area. Small details. Quiet pride. Marcus noticed all of it. As Naomi grabbed her bag near the employee exit, her phone suddenly started ringing. She glanced at the screen, and the color slowly disappeared from her face. Naomi's face lost all color the moment she answered the phone. Marcus saw it instantly. 1 second earlier, she had been smiling softly while putting cleaning supplies back into the storage cart. The next second, she looked terrified. What happened? Marcus asked quietly. Naomi pressed the phone tightly against her ear. I'm coming right now, she whispered quickly before ending the call. Her hands were shaking. Real panic. My son, she said breathlessly. The school nurse said he's struggling to breathe again. She grabbed her bag so quickly that papers slipped onto the floor. Marcus immediately bent down to help her pick them up. Naomi looked overwhelmed now, exhausted, scared. His inhaler stopped working this morning, she explained, while stuffing papers back into her folder. I thought he'd make it through the day. Go, Marcus said gently. Don't worry about anything here. Naomi nodded and rushed toward the exit. But halfway there, she suddenly stopped walking, then slowly turned back toward Evelyn Carter's office. Marcus quietly followed from a distance. Naomi knocked softly on the open office door. Evelyn barely looked up from her computer. Yes? Naomi stood there trying to stay composed. I'm sorry to ask this, but my son's having a severe asthma attack. Evelyn sighed quietly. And? Naomi swallowed hard. Would it be possible to receive part of next week's paycheck early? Just enough to help cover the hospital bill and his medication. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. Employees on probation aren't eligible for payroll advances. Naomi's eyes lowered slightly. Please, even a small amount would help. Evelyn shook her head. Policy is policy. The silence afterward felt painful. Naomi stood there for one long second before quietly nodding. I understand. She turned and walked back into the hallway. Near the front desk, 2 younger employees were organizing paperwork. One of them glanced toward Naomi and whispered to the other, maybe people should stop having kids they can't afford. The other employee laughed softly. Marcus froze. Something hot flashed through his chest instantly. Anger. Real anger. He almost stepped forward without thinking. Almost forgot he was supposed to be Malik Reed instead of Marcus Whitmore. Naomi paused for half a second after hearing the comment. Marcus saw the hurt in her face immediately, but she kept walking toward the exit anyway. No argument, no tears, just silence. Henry noticed Marcus clenching his jaw beside the hallway. "Easy," the older man muttered carefully. Marcus stared toward the doors Naomi had just disappeared through. "People can be cruel for absolutely no reason." Henry shook his head slowly. "No, usually it's because cruelty makes weak people feel powerful." That sentence stayed in Marcus's head long after Naomi left. About 40 minutes later, Marcus quietly left the bank and drove across Atlanta to the emergency clinic listed on Naomi's employee paperwork. The waiting room was crowded with exhausted parents and crying children. Naomi sat near the corner beside a vending machine, with her head lowered into her hands. Caleb slept beside her, wearing a breathing mask connected to a small machine. Naomi looked up in surprise when she saw Marcus walking toward her. "Malik?" she asked softly. Marcus sat beside her carefully. "How's he doing?" Naomi rubbed her eyes tiredly. "Better now." Her voice cracked slightly. "The doctor said we waited too long to refill one of his medications." Marcus looked at Caleb sleeping quietly beside her. The little boy looked small beneath the hospital blanket. Fragile. Naomi stared down at the floor. "I keep thinking things will get easier next month." She laughed softly, but there was no happiness in it. Then another bill shows up. Marcus stayed quiet because he remembered hearing almost identical words from his own mother years ago. Naomi wiped her eyes quickly. "I'm sorry. You probably didn't come here to hear me complain." "You're not complaining," Marcus replied gently. "You're exhausted." Naomi looked at him for a moment, then finally admitted the truth. "I'm scared all the time." That sentence hit Marcus harder than he expected, because she didn't say it dramatically. She said it honestly, like someone who had been carrying fear alone for too long. Before Marcus could respond, an older woman wearing a dark green coat entered the clinic waiting room. Marcus immediately recognized her. Grace Bennett, Senior Operations Director at Whitmore Community Bank. Grace walked directly toward Naomi, holding a large envelope. "Ms. Brooks?" Naomi stood slowly. "Yes?" Grace smiled warmly. "Whitmore Community Bank has an employee emergency assistance program. We were informed about your situation tonight." Naomi looked confused. "I didn't apply for anything." Grace handed her the envelope gently. "Sometimes people deserve help before they ask for it." Naomi opened the envelope carefully. Inside was approval paperwork covering Caleb's emergency treatment and medication expenses for the next 3 months. Naomi stared at the papers in complete disbelief. I don't know what to say." Grace smiled softly. "Just focus on your son." Naomi's eyes filled with tears immediately. Quiet tears this time. The kind people cry when they finally feel seen after struggling alone for too long. Marcus looked away for a second, because something inside him suddenly felt different. Watching Naomi hold her son's hospital paperwork with trembling hands changed him more than he wanted to admit. Because that night, sitting beside her in a crowded clinic waiting room, Marcus realized he was no longer simply observing Naomi Brooks from a distance. He was beginning to care about her in a way that felt deeply personal, and honestly, a little dangerous. 3 days after Caleb's hospital visit, Naomi returned to work looking even more exhausted than before. The dark circles under her eyes had deepened, and her movements felt slower now, heavier somehow. But she still showed up early. still tied her oversized gray uniform neatly, still greeted people politely, even when most employees barely looked at her. Marcus noticed all of it. That morning, Whitmore Community Bank was unusually busy. Customers filled the lobby waiting for mortgage meetings and account reviews. Phones rang non-stop. Employees rushed between desks carrying folders and coffee cups while pretending not to feel stressed. Around 11 o'clock, an older man wearing a faded denim jacket approached the customer service desk, looking confused and upset. "There has to be a mistake," he kept saying. "I've made every payment." The teller looked uncomfortable. "Sir, the system says your mortgage account is overdue by 4 months. "That's impossible," the man replied immediately. His voice shook slightly now. "I've paid every single month for 12 years. Several employees gathered nearby, but nobody actually helped him. One manager blamed the loan department. The loan department blamed the processing team. Another employee quietly suggested the man call customer support instead. The older man looked close to panic now. "They said foreclosure paperwork could start next week," he whispered. "Please, this house belonged to my wife before she passed away." Marcus watched the entire situation from nearby while organizing cleaning supplies beside the hallway. He noticed Naomi pause too. She had been wiping down the customer waiting area when she overheard the conversation. Slowly, she stepped closer. "Excuse me," she said carefully. One employee immediately frowned. "Naomi, this doesn't involve janitorial staff." Naomi nodded politely. "I know, I just..." She glanced toward the older man holding payment receipts in trembling hands. "Can I see those statements for a second?" The manager sighed impatiently, but handed them over anyway. Naomi studied the papers quietly for several seconds. Marcus watched her expression change almost immediately. Focus, concentration, instinct. The same look accountants got when numbers stopped making sense. "These payment codes are duplicated," Naomi said suddenly. The manager frowned. "What?" Naomi pointed toward the statements. "Look here. March and April payments were both processed under the same transaction category." The teller blinked. "So?" Naomi looked toward the computer screen. "So the system probably flagged his account incorrectly after the software migration last quarter." Silence. The manager looked annoyed now. "Naomi, with all respect, this is a banking issue." Naomi stayed calm. "I know." Then she pointed again, "but the escrow adjustment line is also repeating twice." Marcus almost smiled watching it happen, because Naomi wasn't guessing. She knew exactly what she was talking about. Grace Bennett happened to walk into the lobby right then, carrying a stack of folders. She immediately sensed the tension. "What's going on?" she asked. The manager spoke first. "We're handling it." Naomi hesitated briefly before speaking carefully. "I think the customer's account may have been duplicated during the migration update." Grace looked interested immediately. "Show me." Naomi handed her the paperwork. Grace studied it for almost 20 seconds before her expression changed completely. "Oh my God." The manager blinked. "What?" Grace looked directly at him. "She's right." The older customer stared in confusion. "What does that mean?" Grace turned toward him with a gentler voice now. "It means your payments were made correctly. Your account should never have been flagged for foreclosure." The man's shoulders nearly collapsed with relief. "You're serious?" Grace nodded immediately. "Completely." The teller beside the desk looked stunned. "How did she catch that?" Grace glanced toward Naomi. "Because she understands accounting." The entire lobby suddenly felt quieter. Employees who barely acknowledged Naomi before were now staring at her differently. The older customer looked toward Naomi with tears forming in his eyes. "You may have just saved my house," he whispered. Naomi smiled softly. "No, sir. You saved it by making your payments." Marcus stood quietly near the hallway, watching everything unfold. Pride moved through him so suddenly, it almost caught him off guard. Not because Naomi proved she was smart. He already knew she was. But because she still chose to help people even after being treated like she didn't belong there. Grace folded the paperwork carefully. "Naomi, who handled accounting training for you?" Naomi looked embarrassed by the attention now. "Community college mostly. Then I worked at a small credit union before my mom got sick." Grace nodded slowly, clearly impressed. Nearby employees started whispering quietly among themselves. The janitor caught a system error? She used to work in banking? Wait, she actually knows this stuff? By lunchtime, rumors had spread across almost the entire building. Employees who once ignored Naomi were suddenly greeting her politely in the hallways. One teller even asked for her opinion about balancing reports near the customer desk later that afternoon. Henry nearly laughed watching the change happen in real time. "Funny world," he muttered beside Marcus. "People respect you more once they realize you're useful to them." Marcus stayed quiet because the comment bothered him. Naomi deserved respect before proving anything. But at least now, for the first time since arriving at the bank, people were finally seeing her. Near closing time, Grace quietly approached Marcus while Naomi cleaned the lobby windows nearby. "You knew she was talented, didn't you?" Grace asked softly. Marcus gave a careful shrug. "Maybe." Grace smiled faintly. "That woman belongs upstairs, not pushing a mop downstairs." Marcus glanced toward Naomi for a moment. "Yeah," he answered quietly. "I know." But before either of them could say anything else, a sudden announcement email spread through the bank like wildfire. Employees began whispering immediately. Phones came out. Conversations shifted. Because according to the message, Marcus Whitmore himself would finally be visiting the bank in person later that week. And suddenly, everyone inside the building started acting very differently. The atmosphere inside Whitmore Community Bank changed almost overnight after the announcement email spread through the building. Marcus Whitmore, the billionaire founder himself, would finally visit the branch on Friday morning. Suddenly, everyone cared about appearances. Employees who barely greeted janitors before now smiled politely whenever cleaning staff walked past. Managers started complimenting workers they usually ignored. Even the break room felt different. Fake laughter, forced kindness, careful behavior. Marcus noticed all of it immediately. And honestly, it disappointed him more than open disrespect ever had. Because now people were not showing kindness out of character. They were performing for power. Evelyn Carter became the biggest example of all. 2 days earlier, she barely acknowledged Naomi unless something needed cleaning. Now she walked through the bank, acting warm and supportive in front of other managers. "Teamwork matters," she kept saying loudly during meetings. Marcus almost laughed hearing it. One afternoon, Evelyn even stopped beside Henry while he cleaned the hallway. "We appreciate everything maintenance staff does for this bank," she announced dramatically, while another executive stood nearby. Henry waited until she walked away before muttering, "That woman deserves an Oscar." Marcus smirked quietly. Meanwhile, preparations for Friday became more intense every hour. New flowers arrived. Floors were polished twice a day. Employees practiced greeting scripts for wealthy investors attending the visit. Marcus realized the reveal could not wait much longer. So on Wednesday evening, Malik Reed suddenly stopped showing up for work. Officially, Henry told everyone the new janitor had family issues. In reality, Marcus had returned temporarily to his real life, preparing for Friday's reveal with Daniel and Grace Bennett. But Naomi didn't know that. And surprisingly, she noticed his absence immediately. Thursday morning, Naomi looked distracted during her shift. She kept glancing toward the employee entrance like she expected Marcus to walk through the doors carrying his cleaning cart. Henry noticed it too. "You worried about the kid?" he asked quietly while replacing trash bags. Naomi looked embarrassed for a second. "No, I just—" She hesitated. "He disappeared kind of suddenly." Henry shrugged carefully. "Life hits people fast sometimes." Naomi nodded slowly but still looked uneasy. Around lunchtime, Naomi overheard two employees near the front desk talking about payroll cuts connected to staffing changes before the CEO's visit. One of them casually mentioned temporary workers possibly being removed after Friday. Naomi's face tightened immediately. Without hesitation, she walked upstairs toward the executive offices. Marcus wasn't there, of course, but Daniel Price was. Dressed in an expensive navy suit, Daniel had arrived that afternoon to help prepare for Friday's reveal. Naomi knocked carefully on the half-open office door. Daniel looked up from paperwork. "Can I help you?" Naomi stood awkwardly near the doorway, still wearing her gray cleaning uniform. "Sorry to bother you. She swallowed nervously. "I heard there might be staffing cuts." Daniel studied her face quietly. "Who are you asking about?" Naomi hesitated briefly. "Malik?" Daniel almost smiled, but quickly hid it. "The janitor?" Naomi nodded. "I know he's new, but he's a good person." Daniel leaned back carefully, curious now. "And why exactly are you worried about him?" Naomi looked down at her hands. "Because people like him are usually the first to disappear when companies start trying to impress rich executives." That sentence hit Daniel harder than she realized. Naomi continued softly. "He helped me when nobody else did." Daniel stayed silent. Naomi sighed quietly. "I know this probably sounds stupid." "No," Daniel interrupted gently. "It doesn't." Naomi looked relieved hearing that. "I just wanted to ask, if decisions are being made about staffing—" She paused awkwardly. "Please don't punish him for missing a few days." Daniel stared at her for a moment, genuinely moved now. Because Naomi was standing there worried about a man she believed had no power, no status, and no way to help her future. Pure kindness. No calculation attached to it. "I'll keep that in mind," Daniel answered carefully. Naomi smiled softly. "Thank you." After she left, Daniel immediately called Marcus. "You got a problem," he said the second Marcus answered. Marcus frowned slightly. "What happened?" Daniel leaned back in the office chair, smiling faintly. "The woman's defending you now." Silence. Then Marcus spoke quietly. "What exactly did she say?" Daniel repeated the conversation almost word for word. The line stayed silent afterward for several seconds. Finally, Marcus asked softly, "She really came upstairs just for that?" "Yep." Daniel paused. "You're in trouble, my friend." Marcus looked out the penthouse window of his hotel suite downtown while processing everything. Because Naomi's concern felt painfully genuine. She cared about Malik Reed, not Marcus Whitmore the billionaire, not the owner, not the powerful man magazines admired. Just Malik, the quiet janitor she believed might lose his job. And suddenly, Marcus felt something unexpected growing inside him. Guilt. Because every moment Naomi trusted him now made Friday feel more dangerous, more complicated, more personal. That night, Marcus barely slept. He kept replaying Naomi's voice in his head. Please don't punish him. Nobody had protected him like that in years without wanting something in return. Meanwhile, inside the bank, employees spent Thursday evening rehearsing smiles and pretending to become better people overnight. But beneath all the polished behavior and fake professionalism, Friday morning was getting closer with every passing hour, and none of them were truly prepared for what was about to happen. Because when the elevator doors finally opened the next morning, the last person anyone expected to see stepping out in a black designer suit would be the quiet janitor they had spent weeks ignoring. Friday morning arrived with nervous energy spreading through every floor of Whitmore Community Bank. Employees stood straighter, smiled harder. Even the air inside the lobby felt tense. Expensive flower arrangements lined the front desk. Fresh coffee sat beside silver trays of pastries for investors and executives arriving later that morning. Evelyn Carter walked through the building like a director preparing for opening night. Make sure the lobby stays spotless. Fix those chairs. Smile when Mr. Whitmore arrives. Nobody wanted to make a mistake in front of the billionaire owner. Naomi quietly wiped fingerprints from the front glass doors while listening to employees panic around her. Part of her still felt uneasy about Malik disappearing so suddenly. He hadn't answered the short message she sent 2 nights earlier, asking if he was all right. That bothered her more than she expected. Henry noticed her looking toward the entrance again. "Kid'll probably show up eventually," he muttered softly. Naomi nodded but didn't answer. Deep down, something felt strange. At exactly 9 a.m., the lobby suddenly fell silent. The private elevator beside the executive offices lit up. Several managers immediately straightened their jackets. Evelyn quickly fixed her hair and forced a polished smile onto her face. "Everyone ready?" she whispered sharply. Naomi stepped back near the hallway, holding her cleaning cloth quietly against her side. Then the elevator doors opened. A tall black man stepped out wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. His shoes reflected against the marble floor. Expensive watch, calm posture, sharp eyes. The entire lobby froze instantly. Naomi stopped breathing for a second. Henry dropped his mop handle onto the floor with a loud clatter. One employee gasped quietly. Evelyn's face lost all color. Because the man stepping out of the elevator was not a stranger. It was Malik. Or at least the man they thought was Malik. Except now, he looked completely different. Powerful. Untouchable. Marcus Whitmore slowly looked around the silent lobby. His expression stayed calm, but his eyes missed nothing. Shock. Fear. Confusion. Embarrassment. He saw all of it immediately. Daniel Price stepped out behind him holding several folders. Grace Bennett followed seconds later. Nobody inside the bank spoke. Finally, Evelyn forced herself forward with a shaky smile. "Mr. Whitmore, welcome." Marcus looked at her quietly for a moment. "Thank you, Evelyn." Hearing the janitor's voice come from the billionaire himself made several employees visibly tense. Naomi stared at Marcus in complete disbelief. Her mind struggled to connect the 2 versions of him together. The quiet janitor who carried cleaning supplies beside her, and this man, standing confidently in a designer suit while executives surrounded him. They looked like 2 different people. Marcus slowly turned toward the center of the lobby. "For the past several weeks," he said calmly, "I've been working inside this bank under the name Malik Reed." Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed loudly. Marcus continued speaking. "I wanted to see how people treated those they believed had no status, no power, no importance." Evelyn looked sick now. One teller lowered her eyes toward the floor. Henry crossed his arms quietly near the back hallway. Marcus glanced around the room again. "Some of what I saw made me proud." He looked briefly toward Grace. Some of it didn't. When silence tightened across the lobby, Marcus took one slow breath. "I watched employees treat wealthy customers with kindness while ignoring the people cleaning the floors beneath them. Several workers shifted uncomfortably. I watched people speak respectfully to executives and disrespectfully to support staff standing 3 feet away. His voice never became angry. Somehow that made it worse, because disappointment sounded heavier than yelling. Marcus slowly looked toward Naomi now, and I watched one woman walk into this building desperate for work, after life had already pushed her harder than most people here could imagine. Naomi's eyes widened slightly. She was overqualified, exhausted, embarrassed. Marcus paused, but she still treated people with dignity, even after many of them failed to do the same for her. The room stayed completely silent. Marcus turned back toward the employees. Whitmore Community Bank was never supposed to become another place where people are measured by titles or salaries. He looked directly at Evelyn now. Respect should not depend on who's watching. Evelyn lowered her eyes immediately. Nobody defended themselves. Nobody could. Because the billionaire owner had already seen everything personally. Then Marcus stepped slightly closer toward Naomi. His voice softened. Naomi Brooks identified a system error that could have cost a customer his home. Several employees glanced toward Naomi now with completely different expressions than before. She did it while working as a janitor. Marcus paused again. That should embarrass every person in this building who ignored her. Naomi felt her chest tighten hearing those words. Part of her wanted to feel proud. Another part felt hurt, in a way she couldn't fully explain yet. Because suddenly, every conversation with Malik replayed differently inside her head now. Every smile, every late-night conversation, every moment she believed she was talking to someone who understood struggle because he lived it too. Marcus looked at her carefully, but Naomi slowly stepped backward instead. Her face no longer looked shocked. It looked wounded, deeply wounded. Marcus noticed immediately. Naomi, he started quietly, but she shook her head once before turning away. Then, without saying a single word, Naomi Brooks walked toward the front doors of the bank while the entire lobby watched in silence. And in that moment, surrounded by executives, employees, and polished marble floors, the one person Marcus suddenly wanted to reach most was already walking away from him. The lobby stayed painfully quiet long after Naomi walked out of the bank. Nobody moved at first. Nobody knew what to say. Marcus stood near the center of the marble floor, watching the glass doors slowly close behind her. And for the first time since starting this entire experiment, he didn't feel in control anymore. He felt sick. Daniel stepped closer carefully. Marcus. But Marcus lifted one hand slightly. Not now. Across the lobby, Evelyn Carter looked completely shaken. Henry still held his mop handle awkwardly beside the hallway, while several employees stared at the floor, avoiding eye contact. Marcus finally looked back toward the staff. His voice remained calm, but colder now. Effective immediately, Whitmore Community Bank will begin restructuring internal culture policies. The room stayed silent. Every employee, regardless of title, will receive mandatory workplace respect training. Marcus continued. Support staff wages will be reviewed. Emergency assistance access will expand. And performance evaluations will now include treatment of co-workers. Several managers exchanged nervous looks. Marcus wasn't finished. People who create toxic work environments will not remain here simply because they hit financial targets. Evelyn's face tightened immediately. She understood the message perfectly. Grace Bennett stepped forward holding a folder. The updated policies will be distributed by Monday. Marcus nodded once. Then he looked toward Henry. Henry Lawson. Henry blinked in surprise. Yes, sir? You've spent 17 years working in this building industry. Marcus paused. And you treated people with more dignity than most executives I've met. Henry looked uncomfortable hearing praise publicly. Marcus continued. Starting next month, you'll oversee facility operations for every Whitmore branch in Georgia. Henry stared at him speechlessly. You serious? Marcus gave a small nod. Very. The older man looked genuinely emotional for the first time. Thank you, he said quietly. Marcus then turned toward Grace. Grace Bennett will officially become Regional Operations Director. Some employees looked surprised. Marcus wasn't. Grace had earned it years ago. Grace smiled faintly. About time. A few nervous laughs spread across the room, breaking tension briefly. Then Marcus asked the question already weighing heavily on his mind. Where's Naomi? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, Henry spoke softly. She left. Marcus looked toward the front doors again. The empty space somehow felt heavier now than the crowded lobby around him. Later that afternoon, Grace found Naomi sitting alone outside a small diner 3 blocks away from the bank. A half-finished coffee sat untouched beside her. Naomi looked exhausted. Not physically this time. Emotionally. Grace sat across from her quietly. Mind if I join you? Naomi forced a small smile. You already did. Grace sighed softly. He never meant to hurt you. Naomi laughed once under her breath. That's usually what people say after they hurt someone. Grace stayed quiet because honestly, Naomi had a point. Naomi stared down at the table. Do you know what the worst part is? Grace didn't answer. Naomi's eyes slowly filled with tears again. I trusted him because he understood what it felt like to struggle. Her voice cracked slightly. I told him things I wouldn't tell most people. Grace watched her carefully. And now it feels fake? Naomi nodded immediately. I keep replaying every conversation in my head, wondering which parts were real. That sentence hurt even Grace to hear. A few hours later, Marcus requested Naomi return briefly to the bank before the day ended. She almost refused, but eventually she came. Not for him, for closure. Marcus waited inside a quiet conference room overlooking downtown Atlanta. He had removed the expensive jacket hours earlier. Without it, he somehow looked less intimidating, more human again. Naomi entered slowly but didn't sit down. Marcus stood immediately. Thank you for coming. Naomi crossed her arms carefully. What did you want? Marcus took a breath. I wanted to apologize. Naomi looked at him for several long seconds. Which version of you is apologizing right now? The question landed harder than Marcus expected. Naomi! No, she interrupted softly. I really want to know. Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes looked wounded. Because Malik listened to me talk about my son in a hospital waiting room. She swallowed hard. Malik sat beside me while I cried. Marcus lowered his eyes briefly. Naomi continued. But Marcus Whitmore stood there today turning people's lives into a lesson. Silence filled the room. Marcus finally spoke quietly. I never wanted you to feel manipulated. Naomi gave a painful smile. But I was. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out, because deep down, he knew she was right. Naomi slowly shook her head. You let me believe in someone who wasn't real. That sentence hit harder than any business loss Marcus had ever experienced. Harder than betrayal. Harder than humiliation. Because for the first time, Marcus realized good intentions didn't erase real damage. Naomi looked toward the city skyline outside the conference room windows. Do you know why this hurts so much? Marcus stayed silent. Because Malik made me feel safe. Her eyes met his again. And now, I don't know if that person ever existed. Marcus felt something break quietly inside him hearing that. He stepped closer carefully. He did exist. Naomi's expression softened for half a second before hardening again. Then maybe he should have trusted me with the truth. Marcus had no answer for that. None. After a long silence, Marcus finally picked up a folder resting on the conference table. "There's an official offer for you inside." Naomi didn't move. "Senior Community Accounting Coordinator. Full benefits. Triple your current salary." Naomi stared at the folder, but made no effort to touch it. Marcus continued softly. "You earned it." Naomi shook her head slowly. "Maybe." Then she looked directly at him again. "But I can't accept something today, while I still feel like part of someone else's experiment." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Because again, she was right. Naomi stepped backward toward the door. "I hope your bank becomes everything you wanted it to become." Her voice softened slightly. "But next time, try remembering people aren't lessons." Then she quietly walked out of the room. Marcus stayed there alone long after the door closed behind her. And 3 days later, carrying an old cardboard box that once belonged to his mother, Marcus Whitmore found himself standing nervously outside Naomi Brooks's small apartment, hoping somehow it wasn't already too late. 3 days later, Marcus stood outside Naomi Brooks's small apartment building on the west side of Atlanta, holding an old cardboard box against his chest. No security, no driver, no flowers, no expensive gift. Just him, a quiet hallway, and a nervous heart he could no longer hide behind power. When Naomi opened the door, she didn't look surprised. She looked tired. "Marcus," she said softly. Not Malik. Marcus. The name landed between them like a wall. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," he said. Naomi folded her arms. "Then why are you here?" Marcus looked down at the box. "Because I owe you the truth without an audience." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she stepped aside. Her apartment was small but warm. A school backpack sat near the couch. Caleb's drawings covered part of the wall. Little houses, tall building. One picture showed a bank with people standing outside smiling. Marcus looked at it quietly. Naomi noticed. "He wants to design buildings one day," she said. "He says buildings should make people feel safe." Marcus swallowed hard. "Smart kid." Naomi didn't smile. Marcus sat carefully on the edge of a chair and opened the box. Inside was an old name tag, a faded cleaning uniform patch, and a black and white photograph of a woman holding a mop in an office hallway. "This was my mother," Marcus said. Naomi's expression changed slightly. "Angela Whitmore. She cleaned office buildings in Detroit for almost 20 years. He picked up the old name tag. I watched people ignore her, talk down to her, step around her like she was something in the way." His voice grew quieter. "When I built that bank, I thought I was honoring her. But somewhere along the way, I turned my pain into a test, and I put you inside it without asking." Naomi looked away, but she kept listening. Marcus continued. "You were right. Good intentions don't make manipulation harmless." The room went still. That sentence mattered more than any apology dressed in money. Naomi finally looked back at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus answered honestly. "Because I was afraid the truth would change how you saw me." Naomi's eyes softened, but only a little, and hiding it changed how I saw everything. Marcus nodded. "I know." Before either of them could speak again, Caleb walked out from the hallway holding a sketchbook. He stopped when he saw Marcus. "Wait," he said. "You're the janitor from the clinic." Marcus smiled gently. "I was." Caleb looked at his mother. "Is he still your friend?" Naomi didn't answer right away. Marcus bent slightly toward Caleb. "I'm trying to become someone worthy of being her friend again." Caleb studied him with serious 9-year-old eyes. "Then don't lie again." Marcus almost laughed, but the truth in it stopped him. "I won't." Naomi looked at her son, then at Marcus. Something in the room shifted. Not forgiveness yet, but a door opening a little. The next morning, Naomi returned to Whitmore Community Bank. Not because Marcus asked nicely, because she came with conditions. She walked into the conference room with Grace Bennett, Daniel Price, Henry Lawson, and Marcus sitting across from her. She placed a folder on the table. "I'll accept the position," she said calmly, "but not as charity, and not as a reward for being embarrassed in public." Marcus nodded. "Agreed." Naomi continued. "I want a real training path for support staff, cleaners, security guards, reception workers. Anyone with skills should have a way up." Grace smiled. Henry sat straighter. Naomi kept going. "I want emergency assistance to be clear, fast, and private. Nobody should have to beg in front of co-workers when their child is sick." Marcus looked at her with quiet respect. "Done." Naomi held his gaze. "And I want the bank to stop treating dignity like a luxury service." That sentence stayed in the room. Marcus nodded slowly. "That becomes policy." 1 year later, Whitmore Community Bank looked different. Not because the marble was cleaner or the flowers were fresher. It felt different because people acted different. Henry now supervised facilities across several branches and trained managers on how support teams actually kept buildings alive. Grace led operations with firm kindness. Evelyn was no longer in customer leadership. After a formal review, she had been moved into retraining and later chose to leave the company. No public humiliation, just consequences. Naomi became manager of community accounts. She helped working families repair credit, protect homes, and understand loans before signing papers. Customers trusted her because she had lived close to the edge herself. And Marcus? He changed too. He stopped hiding behind grand gestures. He showed up, slowly, honestly. He and Naomi did not fall in love overnight. They built trust in small pieces. Coffee after work, calls about Caleb's school projects, quiet walks after community events, apologies followed by changed behavior. One afternoon, Naomi stood before the entire staff during a training session for new employees. Marcus stood near the back, listening. Naomi looked across the room at tellers, managers, janitors, guards, and interns. Then she said, "This bank is not just a building. It is people, and no one here is invisible. Not the person cleaning the floor. Not the customer with $20 in their account. Not the single mother asking for help. Not the employee too quiet to defend themselves. If we cannot see people clearly, we have no right to serve them." The room went silent. Then Henry started clapping. Grace followed. Soon the whole room joined in. Marcus watched Naomi with quiet pride, knowing the woman everyone once overlooked had become the voice that finally made his bank worthy of its name. Sometimes, the people society notices the least are carrying the heaviest burdens with the quietest strength. A cleaning uniform does not tell you how intelligent someone is. A small paycheck does not measure someone's dignity. And power means very little if it disappears the moment nobody important is watching. Marcus learned that kindness cannot be treated like an experiment. Naomi learned that trust is fragile, but honest change is still possible. And everyone inside that bank learned the same uncomfortable truth. The way we treat people with no status says more about us than the way we treat people with money. Real justice is not humiliation. It is transformation. It is creating spaces where people feel respected before they have to prove their value. Because nobody should need to earn basic human dignity. Not the janitor, not the single mother, not the exhausted worker silently fighting battles nobody sees. In the end, love did not grow from wealth or power. It grew from empathy, from accountability, from choosing to see another person fully and treat them with care anyway. And maybe that is where hope always begins. Not with money, not with status, but with remembering that no human being should ever feel invisible.